create a conservative paradise there, then we'll be able to say to the United States and the world, see, it really works. Our vision of the world really works. And if they had been successful, they would all be running around bragging about it right now, because that was their plan. And they were quite open about it. You go back and read their writings in the 90s, in particular. The Project for a New American Century and all this stuff. And in fact, after we knocked down the government of Saddam Hussein, the first general in there said, okay, let's have elections. And immediately Bush came in and said, no, we're not going to have elections. And you're out of here. My old roommate from Andover is coming in, L. Paul Bremer, and he's going to run this show. And even though the Hague Conventions say it's illegal to rewrite the Constitution of an occupied country, it's a violation of international law, we're going to do it anyway. And we rewrote the Constitution of Iraq to give a flat 15% tax, Steve Forbes flat tax. Unions are essentially illegal. The absolute total free trade, any multinational corporation can come in and buy any assets that they want, no more domestic content laws, no more protectionist laws, do away with the tariffs, the membranes, the economic membranes that protect the economy, do away with the social welfare programs, let's begin weaning people off food subsidies, let's begin weaning them off their housing subsidies, let's privatize the medical industry, essentially let's privatize everything except the oil industry, and we'll get to that soon, right? And they thought, they really believed, these guys, these are ideologues, they really believed that within a year or two they would create a libertarian paradise. This was John Stossel's wet dream. This was just, it's like, this is the libertarian world, right? And we did it, and now they're shooting at us. 50-60% unemployment, and you've got, after World War II, we went to Germany and Japan and said, here's some money, rebuild your country. And they said, okay, we'll build our own cement factories, and we'll build our own steel factory. And, this isn't rocket science. But we said, we'll bring in Halliburton, because under the new rules, multinational corporations can come in and do anything they want. So, but I digress. So, back to the concept of the two middle classes. We've had two middle classes in the United States of substance. The first was from the period of the roughly 1730s, 1740s, arguably, until the early 1800s. And the second was from the 1940s, more or less, until now, although it really began to disintegrate after Reagan declared war on the middle class in the early 1980s. When Reagan came into office, 25% of the American workforce was unionized. 50% of the American workforce had that Teddy Roosevelt life that we were talking about. The world that my dad, with a guy working in a tool and die shop with four kids, was able to raise 4 kids and put us through school and had, Blue Cross Blue Shield through the whole thing right up until the day he died about 6 or 8 weeks ago. And the whole thing, it was right there. That was the American dream. People say, isn't the American dream to get rich? Well, no, I think the American dream was to be the middle class. And that's what most of the world is emulating, or is, striving for. So, what conservatives have looked at in these two periods of the middle class was that there was something in common with them. And that something in common with them is that during both those periods of time, the worst dreams of Sir Edmund Burke, or the worst prophecies of Sir Edmund Burke, the conservative from the 1770s, 80s, 90s, the guy who was having these long written and verbal battles with Tom Paine. I read about, there's a whole chapter about it in the book. Paine, after the Revolutionary War, went over and spent a couple of weeks at Burke's house in England, and then he went off to France to the French Revolution. But Burke was the leading voice of the British conservatives of the day, and many of the American conservatives, frankly, of the day. Sir Edmund Burke, who said, and I'm doing this from memory, so it's probably badly paraphrased, but who said, it does me no harm if a man is allowed to engage in a profession as servile as that of hairdresser or tallow maker, candle maker. But it does society considerable violence if such a person is allowed to participate in governance. Right? That society should have classes and orders. To quote Russell Kirk's 1953 book, The Conservative Mind, which opens with a whole chapter on Burke, which was the book that animated William F. Buckley and Barry Goldwater and a whole generation of the new conservatives. So, what was in common between that middle class and the current middle class was that at the peak of economic power, the people started standing up and saying, hey, wait a minute, we want to have some say in things. In the 1770s, they did so much, so radically, that they actually created a revolution. They actually brought down the existing order. They overthrew a king. They created a new nation. Now, this is a shocking and horrible thing in the minds of the conservatives. I mean, holy cow! 7,000 years of stable culture and civilization, and now the serfs are getting uppity. We can't have this. And they were very, very upset about it. And the same thing was happening in the 60s and 70s. There were these conservatives, whether it was Leo Strauss or many of the others who were observing the scene in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, who were seeing women saying, hey, we want to have reproductive rights and we want an equal place in the marketplace, and who were seeing African Americans saying, hey, we want that franchise that you talked about 100 years ago. We would like to have those equal rights too. And we were having gays coming out and saying, we're here too, and we're human beings and part of the society, and on and on. And the cities were burning. I mean, people and the students and the kids were standing up and saying, we're not going to fight your stinking wars. This war is no good. We don't believe in it. And the conservatives looked at this, and many of us looked at it and said, this is a good, healthy sign of a society in ferment where, ideas are being exchanged and good things are going to come out of this, which is how Jefferson viewed the Revolutionary era. John Adams was horrified by it, the first conservative president of the United States, the second president of the United States. And many of the conservatives of the day were horrified by that, by and large. I mean, Adams himself, of course, was in favor of the American Revolution, but as a conservative, let's not let the people elect the Senate, after all. And we didn't do that until 1913. That's how long it took with the 17th Amendment. And so these conservatives saw this rising up of people in the 60s and 70s when the middle class reached its peak of economic power, when people had enough job security that they knew that, if I lose this job, I can get another job. If I get fired from GM because I went out and protested for a week, I can get a job at Ford. That kind of thing. Or, I'm going to college, and if I drop out for a term, I can get, or a semester, I can get back in. In fact, back in the day, back in the good old days, my friends. Well, for example, my wife put herself through college working as a waitress in a Howard Johnson's. I put myself through college working in radio, which, back in the 60s I started out anyway, where the first couple of years I was doing it was basically a minimum wage job, which was like $2.40 an hour or something. And you could put yourself through college back then, in that way, with that kind of job. So, and now we have basically indentured servitude. So these conservatives looked at this and they said, this is a society in chaos. This is dangerous. I mean, this is a potential revolutionary movement. We can't have this. And it must be that when a middle class emerges, when people become economically empowered, then they start demanding all these other, says, places at the table and whatnot. And that's a dangerous thing to society. That doesn't produce a stable society. So they set about to deconstruct the middle class. Most people who look at the middle class and the loss of the middle class, at the 45 million unemployed people, and the fact that it's been a decade since the minimum wage has gone up, and the huge pockets of poverty around the United States, and the increases in poverty certainly in the last 6 years, and all these things. Most of them think it's just greedy industrialists, or the influence of inherited wealth. It must be just the Walton family or something. It's just folks who were funding this thing to change the language from the inheritance tax to the death tax. Those folks are along for the ride. They're making a tax cut, reduced the income tax. We now have frankly, I'm amazed that most Americans never caught this, but it really wasn't widely reported at the time. We now have a two-tiered income tax system in the United States. If you earn your living by your thinking or your doing, in other words, if you get a paycheck, you pay an income tax rate that can go up into the 30% range, the low 30s. If, however, you earn your living sitting on your butt around the pool waiting for the dividend check to arrive in the mail every month, in other words, through investments, the maximum income tax you'll pay is 15% under the last Bush tax cut. So Paris Hilton will never pay more than 15% income tax right now. I mean, this is that two-tiered system. This is the society of orders and classes that Edmund Burke talked about, that Russell Kirk talked about.